In this video, we will be power-scaling how strong is the IDW Comics Godzilla, specifically the Godzilla from the comics Kingdom of Monsters, the one specifically just called Godzilla, although it's also online referred to as Godzilla Ongoing and History's Greatest Monster, and the comic story known as Godzilla Rulers of Earth. All three of these stories fit in the same continuity, which came out between 2011 and 2015, the first comic continuity established by IDW after obtaining the license for Godzilla, and as we all know, it would be the first of many. Starting off with Kingdom of Monsters, first, there was nothing. Then, there was something, a big something, in the form of Godzilla, whose first action is literally eating two kids as he comes up out of the sand, mouth first. And, if I'm being honest, Kingdom of Monsters was a much darker story than the two following ones. There's a lot of human deaths that we see on screen, some more gruesome than others. What's weird about this Godzilla is that he doesn't really ever get an established origin. He just appeared one day. There's no sightings of Godzilla prior to the year this story takes place, which, while we're on that subject, given the fact that the president in this story is clearly Obama, the fact that he brings up the oil rig disaster, and the fact that the comic itself came out in 2011, I think it's safe to assume that this probably takes place in the year the comic came out. This Godzilla has your standard Heisei height and weight, standing at 100 meters as confirmed with multiple sources, most notably Spacegodzilla's height when compared to real London monuments. Zilla having a confirmed height of 200 feet, which is roughly 60 meters, and the fact that he's certainly smaller than Godzilla, and the fact that the writers themselves confirmed that the majority of monsters are all around the 100-meter height, and we're just going to assume that his weight would reflect this, being roughly around 60,000 metric tons. I'm not really going to go much into detail about the plot of the story. That's what reading the actual comics or the Wikizilla summaries are for, otherwise we'd be here all day. Godzilla's first notable feat is being able to apparently destroy skyscrapers, as shown in this image apparently, with I guess the remains of a skyscraper rubble around him, as well as being able to tag multiple supersonic jets, and that's just with his physical combat speed. And after taking a nuclear explosion from a cruise missile launched from a submarine, these typically range in the town level attack potency, Godzilla absorbs the radiation and gains the ability to fire his atomic breath, which I guess he just didn't have before. After this, other monsters slowly but quickly start popping up all over the world, like Anguirus and Rodan and Batra. Meanwhile, there's these two creepy psychic twins, might as well be the evil equivalent of the Mothra twin fairies, and they have psychic powers, and they apparently mind control Batra. They don't do a whole lot right now, but they're going to become relevant later, so I thought I'd just bring them up right now. One other thing I wanted to touch on is Rodan's origin, being an egg recovered from the blast site of the Tunguska event, an explosion that happened back in 1908 that produced between 3 to 50 megatons of TNT, so small city to city level. Again, Rodan as an egg survived this because the egg was directly recovered from the blast site. Also, the fact that Rodan just goes from a newly hatched baby to fully grown in like an hour or two tops. Coming to think of it, Kumonga and Godzilla Ongoing also kind of gets a bit of a growth spurt. He looks to only be a little bit taller than an average car, but then fast forward to Rulers of Earth and he's as big as almost every other monster. Anyway, we eventually get our first real fight between Godzilla and Anguirus, which starts at the end of one issue, and then is immediately over by the beginning of the very next issue. This implies a heavy domination on Godzilla's part. Heck, for all we know, he might not have even needed his atomic breath to knock him out. Though I do wonder how most of his fights would go without the atomic breath, since he really seems to love using it. Though, to be fair, as we'll see later in these issues, the atomic breath is stupid powerful, often one-shotting a lot of his opponents. Shortly after Batra evolves into his Omega form, he has a brief fight against Rodan, but doesn't land any hits and the fight is stopped, so I can't really draw any conclusions from who's stronger in this fight. Some monk guy sacrifices himself to awaken King Ghidorah, who's just been here this whole time as a stone statue, clearly a GMK reference. He flies off to fight Godzilla, and while he certainly puts up a much more impressive fight than Anguirus, he's ultimately eventually brought down by the King of the Monsters. A month after Godzilla's first appearance, the US government decides to finally build Mechagodzilla, which takes another month to happen. Kind of amazing they built Mechagodzilla in just a single month. He's AI controlled in this fight, which might have been their undoing, as well as the fact that they decided not to armor him better in the back. He manages to put up a few good hits against Godzilla, but is ultimately outmatched. Once he takes a hit to the bag, something's knocked loose in his programming and he goes berserk, destroying the city in the process. Needless to say, humanity was not amused. Another month passes, and the rogue Mechagodzilla finally shuts down after saving our main human characters from some wolves. They somehow get Mechagodzilla back up and running, just in time to have a brief fight against Anguirus, which Mechagodzilla is eventually able to take down using some convenient paralyzing missiles. Though I do want to point out the main military guy was still getting used to the controls. I do wonder how this fight would have gone without the paralyzer missiles. Seeing an opportunity to finally score a win against Godzilla, the guy flies Mechagodzilla to where Godzilla currently is, and the two have an epic showdown with King Ghidorah finally getting back into the mix with a three-way battle. Despite King Ghidorah focusing on Godzilla, the guy decides not to take any chances and electrocutes both of them, knocking out King Ghidorah, but Godzilla remains standing. Apparently, Mechagodzilla is armored with what I guess is supposed to be his Heisei equivalent's diamond mirror armor, because it's able to charge his most powerful weapon, the plasma grenade, by getting hit by Godzilla's atomic breath specifically. Unleashing the attack, Mechagodzilla is able to knock out Godzilla. Right after Mechagodzilla leaves, however, the psychic twins show up, and with Batra's help, they basically throw Godzilla into a nearby nuclear reactor, which normally runs in like the megatons of power. This revitalizes Godzilla and might have also potentially given him a power-up, given the last time he got power from radiation was from a town-level nuclear missile, and that allowed him to use his signature atomic rev. So how strong do you think he got after absorbing a city-level nuclear reactor? The evil twins try to take control of Godzilla, but he's Godzilla, so it doesn't work, and he immediately knocks out Rodan very quickly and gets into a beam clash against Batra. The resulting beam clash causes an explosion which knocks both monsters out, and apparently is a multi-continental feat, given that, as you can see in this shot, the resulting explosion basically destroyed all the clouds in the center part of North America. It is kind of crazy that Batra, of all monsters, is able to contend with Godzilla, and I do kind of wonder what would have happened if Mechagodzilla stuck around. His armor is built specifically to absorb Godzilla's atomic breath, not Batra's eyepiece, so who really knows how that worked? Now, some might want to scale the monsters to having faster-than-light reaction and combat speed due to Batra's eye beams, but, well, they're specifically called prism beams, and beam doesn't necessarily automatically mean it's light. But don't worry, we're going to be getting more solid points of evidence for the monster's combat and reaction speeds later. One last thing I wanted to point out before we move on to the next part is apparently the ending for Kingdom of Monsters would have been quite a bit different, with Godzilla and Mechagodzilla, instead of fighting each other, actually teaming up to fight an army of mind-controlled monsters. Now that's something you don't see every day, Godzilla and Mechagodzilla teaming up. Fast forwarding 2 years later to the events of Godzilla. Very stupid name, because it's about to be another upcoming IDW comic story that is also just called Godzilla. Not to mention the fact that it's probably not a good idea to name a specific story after the character in question. Anyway, this story, also known as Godzilla Ongoing, and its omnibus version, History's Greatest Monster, take place 2 years after the end of Kingdom of Monsters, as confirmed a couple issues in. We get a very brief fight between Rodan and Titanosaurus. Yeah, just new monsters start slowly popping up all over the world. Why they didn't do anything during the first story is anyone's guess. But the fight doesn't really last long enough to get any conclusion of who's stronger than who. The human characters are basically hunting down monsters and attacking them with this weapon called the headache beam. It doesn't seem to work on Titanosaurus, but it does seem to affect Rodan. Although it's ultimately Titanosaurus that gets knocked out by a building falling on him while Rodan manages to escape. The US military and government continues to make good decisions by not keeping up on Mechagodzilla, the only thing they have that was actually able to defeat Godzilla, and instead just stick him in a warehouse somewhere, just give the blueprints to some rich tycoon to make his own version of Mechagodzilla, which is basically Kiryu. Though in his first fight against the King of the Monsters, he ultimately proves to be vastly inferior. He even tanks the Absolute Zero Cannon, which, yes, that is the Absolute Zero Cannon as confirmed in later stories issues. Whether or not it's as strong as its movie counterpart, however, is up for interpretation. Maybe it's just a matter of better mech, inferior pilots, since obviously this guy isn't a trained soldier. I guess for some stupid reason, despite having the blueprints to the original Mechagodzilla, he decided not to maintain the armor that absorbs Godzilla's atomic breath and fires the super powerful plasma grenade, swapping it out for the Absolute Zero Cannon. Spoiler alert, Mechagodzilla basically peaked in King of Monsters. At some point, Godzilla gets trapped in some force field box, which is apparently outputting the energy of a black hole. And of course, Godzilla, being Godzilla, just frees himself by blasting it with its atomic breath. Now, the thing about black holes is they greatly vary in power, with the weakest ones being small planetary and the strongest ones being capable of engulfing multiple galaxies. The Versus Wiki sort of has a debate on this specific feat, with the low ball being small planetary, and the high ball, I guess based off the size of the specific force field or something, elevating it to brown dwarf level. Ultimately, the safest bet seems to go with this low ball, so small planetary. This likely means that Godzilla was probably always in this range of power as far back as near the beginning of issue 1 of Kingdom of Monsters. I mean, which makes more sense? Godzilla to go from town level to multi-continent level to small planetary in just 2 years, or him just starting off in small planetary and just slowly getting stronger and stronger instead. Aliens start invading, being led by Spacegodzilla, who actually popped up on the moon at the very end of the last issue of Kingdom of Monsters, though he decided to just leave and come back 2 years later with reinforcements, I guess. He's accompanied by Monster X in his first comic appearance, Hedorah, and Gigan. As will be proven later, Mothra's basically a rival to Batra, and as such the two monsters should be evenly matched, which is important because Monster X basically one-shots Mothra, knocking her out in a single hit of his gravity beams. Batra and Titanosaurus team up against Spacegodzilla, but are ultimately defeated quickly with little effort. Spacegodzilla knocking Batra into Titanosaurus as he's firing off his prism beams, which somehow electrocute both, knocking him out. Mechagodzilla is still partially damaged as his weapon systems are online, and he stands no chance against Hedorah, who quickly overwhelms him. I don't think he would have really been able to do much without the Absolute Zero cannon anyway. Godzilla soon starts his own fight against Hedorah, and while the fight does go on for a while, he is eventually able to beat Hedorah, as well as replicating the feat from the Showa era where he uses his atomic breath to fly out of a canyon. What I also love is that they get Kumonga to ride on top of Kiryu as they fly into the final battle, but they have to stop to basically recharge Kiryu. I guess Kumonga just kept chilling on top of the giant Mechagodzilla as a bunch of human workers nervously worked around him. Kumonga himself doesn't really do much, but he gets points for at least attempting to take on Monster X, who easily knocks Kiryu into the water, which I guess is his weak spot, after tanking an attack from the Absolute Zero cannon just like Godzilla did. Meanwhile, Gigan's fighting a 2v1 against Rodan and Anguirus, who is eventually able to blind him by breaking his eye visor, and they eventually knock him out after a lengthy fight. Godzilla, Spacegodzilla, and Monster X accidentally get into a 3-way beam clash, which results in an explosion knocking all 3 monsters down, basically proving that they're all evenly matched. I love it when that happens. Though I guess Monster X was more easily dazed than the other two, because this gives Godzilla enough time to focus on Spacegodzilla. Though Spacegodzilla recovers first and starts blasting away at Godzilla, who gets saved by Kiryu blasting Spacegodzilla with the Absolute Zero cannon, which knocks him off balance enough for Godzilla to target his crystals on his back, which as we all know is basically his power source, and once that's destroyed, Spacegodzilla's cooked. While it was technically a team effort, I'm still making Godzilla and Spacegodzilla evenly matched, since Spacegodzilla only got the edge on Godzilla because he attacked first. Monster X recovers and soon transforms into Kaiser Ghidorah, and quickly overwhelms Godzilla. Then Rodan, being the absolute chat he is apparently in this final fight, goes straight from fighting Gigan with Anguirus straight into the battle against Kaiser and Godzilla, claps his wings together, and this somehow decapitates one of Kaiser Ghidorah's heads. He then proceeds to take 2 hits from Kaiser Ghidorah's attacks before being knocked out. Keep in mind that Mothra, who should be equal in power to Batra, was knocked out by 1 hit from Monster X, while this guy's taking 2 hits from Kaiser. Rodan, the guy who was easily knocked out by a much earlier, much weaker Godzilla. I should also mention real quick that apparently, according to one of the writers, Spacegodzilla apparently had some kind of snack or two on the way to Earth. What this exactly means, I'm not sure. Did he feast on dying stars, black holes, comets? They don't specify what exactly. Anyway, with 2/3 of Kaiser Ghidorah's heads remaining, Godzilla recovers and manages to overwhelm and take it down for good. I guess losing that 1 head made all the difference. And I guess Rodan's wing clap ability just bypasses conventional durability, and he should really use that more often. Imagine if you used that against Godzilla. Ugh, nerf Rodan, please. Fun fact, Megaguirus was actually supposed to take the place of Monster X before I guess they secured the rights to Monster X, which I imagine in that case Spacegodzilla would have taken center stage as the final boss of this story rather than Monster X/Kaiser Ghidorah, because I can't exactly imagine Megaguirus outshining any of the other monsters. Funny I say that, given what's going to happen with Megaguirus when she finally pops up in the comics later. Moving on to the longest Godzilla comic story to date, Rulers of Earth, set 4 years after the events of Godzilla Ongoing, which we can conclude from a statement that occurs about halfway through Rulers of Earth after a 4-year time skip, where one of the characters says it's been 10 years since Godzilla first appeared. This is roughly at about the halfway point through Rulers of Earth, which is right after a stated 4-year time skip. So through process of subtraction, we can conclude that this is when the first half of Rulers of Earth takes place. Our first actual monster fight is between Gigan and Kumonga. Gigan, still partially blinded from his fight with Rodan and Anguirus 4 years ago, has to resort to sneaky tactics in order to get the edge against Kumonga, who traps him with his webbing. But thanks to his sharp appendages and laser eyes, he's able to get the win. The fact that Gigan even had to use this kind of strategy must mean that Kumonga must be at least somewhat comparable to Gigan, even if he's in a somewhat weakened state. I mean, he is a cyborg monster. He can't exactly naturally heal the other monsters can. Next up is Godzilla versus, well, Zilla, which is the rebranded American TriStar Godzilla. Stated to be about 200 feet tall, which would put him at roughly 60 meters, which is the same height he was in Final Wars. He's already stated to be faster than Godzilla in the water, and he proves his speed holds up even on land as he manages to evade several of Godzilla's hits and get in quite a few good hits of his own. Though the military does have to bail him out a few times when it looks like Godzilla's about to put him down for good. And Godzilla ultimately gives up trying to kill him and lets him get away. But I will say due to this, Zilla's speed and reflexes help make up for his lack of raw strength, and I'd say he's not that far off from Godzilla either. Sometime later, Godzilla emerges from the ocean with a huge scar across his chest, and we find out that he actually got beaten by Destroya underwater off screen. Yeah, Destroya, they're just throwing him in this early in the comic. He ends up teaming up with Mothra, as well as apparently taking some energy from a nuclear reactor he obtained. And as mentioned by one of the human characters at the end of the battle, Godzilla apparently planned to team up with Mothra, as well as have the nuclear reactor to power himself back up. Destroya lands a hit on Mothra with his laser katana, which was apparently so bad that even 4 years later, Mothra still hasn't recovered from it. And while Mothra is generally inferior to Destroya, her scale ability does manage to get him to cough up mud, so she does have one method of injuring Destroya. Godzilla, on the other hand, is doing much better after absorbing energy from that reactor, as he's able to just throw Destroya around and even rip off his horn before finishing him off with an atomic breath, though this wouldn't be the end for Destroya. After that, we get a series of skirmishes which really showcase the power scale, with Varan and Rodan pretty much being even throughout their fight, though Varan does manage to cut up one of Rodan's wings, which gets him to retreat. I'd say Varan only won that fight due to, again, his natural weaponry giving him the advantage, not so much in raw strength since they were going at it for pretty much the entire issue. And then Gyra immediately takes away Varan's win by bashing him on the head repeatedly, forcing him to fly off as well. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, and what happens in Vegas is Godzilla gets into a fight against the Millennium upgraded version of Gigan and his new partner in crime, the Millennium UFO, which as we all know is going to spit out Orga before the end of the night. Gigan actually quickly overwhelms Godzilla with his new abilities, and it's even implied he had the chance to kill Godzilla right here and now, but decided to take his time and play with his food. The UFO then extracts energy from Godzilla, so that should weaken him at least a little bit in order to fully finish creating Orga. Gigan later manages to get the edge on Godzilla again, so I'm actually going to say that Gigan's stronger than Godzilla in this fight, since Godzilla didn't really seem to make any lasting impact. In fact, this is probably one of his worst fights in the entire trilogy of comics, since he seems to sort of be like the weak link in this fight, as shown when Mogira shows up and is pretty much trading blow for blow to Gigan, with neither one really being able to inflict any actual damage. This all changes, however, when Orga finally emerges and quickly rips Mogira in half, but it's kind of moot since Mogira is designed to split in half anyway, and he just attacks in his Land Mogira and Star Falcon forms. Then the absolute legend Jet Jaguar shows up and, wasting no time, shrinks down to human size, flies into Orga, and then just resizes himself to monster size and just blows him apart from the inside out. Jet Jaguar was not messing around. Gigan retreats, and when Godzilla tries his hand at fighting Jet Jaguar, he floors him and knocks him out in one punch, though you could argue Godzilla wasn't at his best at this point because he already had some energy drained from the Millennium UFO, and also might have gotten a little tired after trying to fight Gigan. Jet Jaguar must be able to see into the future because he takes the unconscious Godzilla to some far-off island, dumps him down, while he goes to take down the alien ship, and Godzilla wakes up just in time to have a fight with Biolante. Where'd she come from? Just like with Spacegodzilla, no one knows and it's never explained. It's just randomly Biolante. Biolante does throw him around a bit, but being part plant, obviously, she's gonna have some weakness against Godzilla's very hot atomic breath. Not to mention, when he blows apart part of the volcano, the lava also weakens her, and Godzilla's eventually able to finish her off with another atomic breath. You'd think being part Godzilla would enable her to come back from this, and to be fair, she's also, like Orga, technically not dead since her spores just go up into the atmosphere. But again, just like with Orga, nothing comes from that, and honestly, being part plant is really hurting her. Fun fact, around this point, the comic was apparently in danger of ending right here, and apparently Biolante would have served as the final boss of this comic had it not been extended to the issues we got. It's because of this that I like to think that Biolante should outscale Orga in terms of power, if only because Godzilla had to take quite a while to weaken her just to finish her off, and also being part plant, so the odds were kind of against her. Godzilla then has a brief struggle against Manda and Ghidorah underwater, and while the two are powerful enough to restrain him, he quickly throws them all. We also get a flashback to all these ancient monsters, and apparently King Caesar, who was the designated protector of Earth, so he should outscale all of these monsters from the flashback, apparently had a rivalry with Megalon, who for some strange reason doesn't show up again in the comics. He's only in these flashbacks. But again, I'll have something very important to say about Megalon shortly. Godzilla fights against both Gyra and Sanda, although even though they are able to give him a little trouble, the humans actually state that if they don't intervene, he would kill both of them. So even together, they're not fully a match for him. Kiryu finally returns to the story, now in his upgraded form from Tokyo SOS, and makes short work of Baragon, but since Baragon hasn't fought anyone important, there's not really much to gather from there. Godzilla's final fight in this first half of Rulers of Earth, he fights Destroya, Ghidorah, Titanosaurus, and Manda underwater all at the same time, and he actually seems to be doing fine for the most part. Again, the two monsters restrain him and Destroya impales him, but again, he quickly throws them off and I guess forces Destroya away from him. He even seems to block Titanosaurus' punch and break his arm, showing that yes, this Godzilla does know how to throw hands properly. Jet Jaguar takes a crack at fighting Destroya, and he's definitely outmatched and has to use Kiryu's Absolute Zero Cannon to finish him off for good. Whether or not that would have gone better if he tried fighting Destroya without using the Absolute Zero Cannon, well, I don't like his chances. Some submarines fire nuclear missiles down, and while that's obviously not going to kill Godzilla, the rubble definitely takes him out of commission for the 4-year time skip. And it's apparently during this time, Godzilla would fight Megalon, or at least that was the plan. He would have fought Megalon underground, underwater, whatever, and it would have somehow ended up all the way in the Arctic, which explains why, after the 4-year time skip, humans uncover Godzilla frozen in ice. That would have apparently been the result of the aftermath between his fight with Megalon. And for all we know, maybe that's the reason why Megalon's not in this story. Who's to say that fight simply still didn't happen just off screen? Finally proceeding to our time skip, our first fight is with Anguirus getting his butt badly kicked by the Showa Mechagodzilla, who has been constructed using alien technology. Stated by the alien himself, in disguise as a human, that he is cheaper but just as deadly as the US's Kiryu. Though I do think Kiryu can beat these Mechagodzillas with one fire of his Absolute Zero Cannon, which will be proven in a little bit. Godzilla finally emerges again after 4 years with another power-up as he's absorbed all the radiation from a nuclear submarine. Well, I'm not sure if he just naturally grows stronger over time without doing anything, since he was frozen in ice for an unknown period of time during those 4 years, or if he only grows stronger through battle is anyone's guess. However, he is soon faced with multiple Mechagodzillas, and while they do give him quite a bit of trouble, he does eventually lock in and start tearing them apart one by one. Again, these things should be on par at least with the original 2 Mechagodzillas, which means that Godzilla may theoretically be 4 times stronger than the original Mechagodzilla at this point. Another example of the crazy power creep in this story, as Anguirus goes from getting his butt whooped by a Mechagodzilla to now suddenly being able to tear off his arm and take one of them down on his own. And this was all like in the same day too. I'm starting to think Anguirus might be part Saiyan and he just got a Zenkai boost, where he just recovers from a near fatal injury and becomes so much stronger as a result. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, Mecha King Ghidorah shows up here as well. Apparently the same Ghidorah all the way back from King Kingdom of Monsters, he got beat so badly by being electrocuted by the original Mechagodzilla that he went into a 10-year coma, and apparently the aliens found him and Gigan cut off his middle head so they could turn him into Mecha King Ghidorah. He does knock out Godzilla when he first arrives, but this was basically a sneak attack, and Godzilla didn't seem aware of his presence anyway, and when Godzilla does fight him, he quickly overwhelms him, drawing Mecha King Ghidorah into a retreat. Man, they did Ghidorah dirty in this trilogy. We know that he can fly very fast, as the aliens tracking his movements point out how he's already reached the edge of the solar system, and this was probably within like a minute-long conversation after the battle. Similarly, another monster speeds right past him. One of the two exchange looks. It's Spacegodzilla, and he goes up against Gigan. Two are pretty much trading blows back to back. Spacegodzilla finally only winning after he uses his crystal powers to trap one of Gigan's arms, forcing him to cut it off. He won by being smarter, not stronger or faster. And since the little laser thing that Gigan fires out of his eye is basically a laser, it means every time these monsters dodge set attacks, they're moving faster than light. Godzilla then has a fight with Ibira, and Ibira gets his butt kicked for practically 2 issues. Though it is respectable that Ibira is even able to take a beating from Godzilla for 2 issues. He's biting down on his giant claw, and you think he's gonna rip it off, but he never does. He was never gonna win, but he's certainly going the distance against the Big G. It's also at this point that whenever the humans talk about bringing in a mecha to fight, they always talk about Kiryu and Mogira in the same capacity, which makes me wonder if the two are supposed to be equal in terms of power at this point. They pretty much are treated as equals at this point, but Mogira doesn't really do anything until the final battle, so I kind of wonder about that. Godzilla's next fight is against Megaguirus, and Megaguirus just beats Godzilla through sheer speed, as well as absorbing his energy to fire her own version of Godzilla's atomic breath in the form of a giant blue fireball, which knocks him out. Though the two have a second round, and Godzilla certainly seems to do better, using his nuclear pulse attack to knock her away. While we're on the subject of Godzilla's nuclear pulse, I should point out that when he was fighting the 4 Mechagodzillas, when they started throwing up their energy shield, Godzilla's atomic breath obviously didn't do anything, but the atomic pulse sent all 4 of them flying. This seems to indicate that his atomic pulse is much stronger than his atomic breath, and according to the writers, he uses it solemnly because it drains quite a bit of his energy. As I mentioned before, Mothra and Batra are pretty much fated rivals, so they should be similar in terms of power. Batra does have another fight with Mothra, and sadly Mothra's still not recovered from her fight with Destroya, but still manages to put up a good fight against Batra, despite being weakened. Almost too well, given the severity of her injuries. Almost makes me think if she wasn't injured, she might actually beat Batra. As for Batra himself, I'm not really sure if he got any stronger either, but I'd assume so, since multiple monsters get stronger over the course of the story, as confirmed by the writer himself. It is at this point that we enter the final arc of this story, the Trilopod arc, where the aliens unveil this new creation of theirs, the Trilopod. Giant parasite organisms that absorb the energy of other monsters, fuse with the bigger Trilopods, and become hybrid monsters, mimicking the power and somewhat appearance of the monsters whose energy they absorb. Basically, kind of think of it as a discount Orga. And apparently, according to the writers, these things were actually based off Orga. They weren't created from scratch, they were taken from some distant planet, but they were modified using Orga's DNA. So you'd think as a result, they should at least scale to Orga, if not stronger, because they would basically be Orga combined with whatever power they've absorbed from the monsters. The smaller ones are the Trilopod Alphas, and they're in charge of absorbing the energy, and then they merge on the back of the Trilopod Betas, which are the big ones, and they fuse to become the new hybrid. The Beta alone is able to restrain Godzilla easily, and the first hybrid he faces off against is a Trilopod Megaguirus, who easily outmatches him. But then later in the second fight, Godzilla is able to take down the T-Mega, further proving that Godzilla is indeed growing stronger throughout the story, and at an alarming rate too. It's at this point that a bunch of other monsters finally get involved in the story, as well as some newcomers like Gorosaurus and King Caesar. Gorosaurus succeeds in tearing off the arms of one of the Trilopod Betas, but is stopped just short of actually beating one. Again, keep in mind, these things should theoretically be at least as strong as Orga, and King Caesar himself later rips one in half, so yeah, I'd say he's pretty strong. And in one of the craziest team-ups we've ever seen in the franchise, Godzilla ends up teaming up with Spacegodzilla to fight the Spacegodzilla Trilopod hybrid. Team up literally only lasts like 20 seconds, though, as Godzilla manages to kill the Spacegodzilla with an atomic breath. Again, keep in mind, these things should theoretically be as strong as the monsters whose energy they absorb. So this means that Godzilla could potentially one-shot Spacegodzilla. That is crazy. He can basically like one-shot pretty much like final bosses of the previous story at this point. To make matters worse, the Trilopods have now absorbed Godzilla's DNA, and now there are 3 T-Godzillas running around. We get a flashback of Mothra engaging Kamacuras. The fight doesn't last that long, and obviously Mothra should be stronger. The evil psychic twin characters have come back into the story. They state how they've gotten weaker since their injuries back in the original Kingdom of Monsters story, but together they are able to use their psychic powers to just make the head of one of the Trilopod betas explode. And not just any Trilopod beta, but one that has absorbed the energy of Batra. Again, keep in mind, they're weakened at this point, as their own admission. Makes you wonder if they were present for the second story, if they could have just mind-controlled or decapitated Kaiser Ghidorah. King Caesar also has a very brief fight with Batra. Obviously, King Caesar comes off as the stronger monster, but Batra does put in a bit of effort, which I guess further confirms that Batra is a lot stronger than he was in the previous story. King Caesar's also been proven to be very smart, as he actually allows himself to be captured by the Trilopods so he can be brought into their hive so he could free all the other monsters that were captured from within, including Kamacuras and Camobius. Where have they been this entire time? Who knows? The alien leaders actually have an interesting conversation where they recall an event where their homeworld was destroyed by King Ghidorah. This King Ghidorah notably has a design similar to his Showa appearance, which sets him apart from his Heisei counterpart. I think this was done on purpose to indicate that he was a different King Ghidorah from the one from Kingdom of Monsters and Rulers of Earth. They even speculated that Mecha King Ghidorah was leaving to find another of his kind. In fact, the one alien, after having already witnessed the Trilopods in action, still believed that this King Ghidorah, along with Godzilla, could probably stop their invasion. So Godzilla, during the climax of this entire story, is being compared to an entirely different King Ghidorah who destroyed the aliens' homeworld. And again, the aliens, having now seen the power of the Trilopods, still believes that King Ghidorah could stop them. We're gonna call this guy Chad Ghidorah, and I honestly believe that if we ever got a 4th story set in this timeline, Chad Ghidorah would have become the final boss of said story. It's actually stated multiple times that at this point Godzilla is exhausted from all the constant battles he's been in the last couple of issues. Yet he still continues to grow stronger through battle, as he eventually manages to take down one of the Trilopod Godzillas by himself. That is actually unbelievable and terrifying. Godzilla is literally growing stronger faster than he can run out of energy. Another team up I never thought I'd see is him teaming up with Kiryu, as well as Mogira to fight against the T-Hybrids. Though unfortunately they're outmatched, as they are mechanical monsters and can't grow stronger through natural means like all the other monsters in this story. Kiryu apparently gets knocked over by a T-clone of Rodan, and Mogira similarly gets destroyed by a T-clone of Titanosaurus. Godzilla rage quits and summons all the other monsters to his location, and we actually see Titanosaurus contending with his Trilopod counterpart, again further proving that they're probably similar in power to their original counterparts. That, or the Earthborn monsters are just simply growing so fast at this point in strength. Now everyone's at least as strong as Orga. Gigan gets his moment of glory as he emerges from a destroyed alien ship, taking out the other alien ships with his upgraded form with the double chainsaws. He's a bit of a wild card actually, because he starts fighting both the aliens, Trilopods, and also Jet Jaguar. He's just out for blood and he doesn't care who he gets it from. The two are apparently evenly matched, as the author actually confirms that Jet Jaguar could beat Gigan, though only through fighting smarter, not harder. Even Zilla gets in on the action and manages to slice a cut across one of the Trilopod Godzilla's throats. Also, interesting fact, Zilla, along with King Caesar, are the only monsters not to have a Trilopod clone take their DNA. Even Kamacuras and Camobius got their own Trilopod clones, but not Mothra. What'd that even look like with the larva face? Anyway, soon the mother of all Trilopods, the queen, Magita, emerges from the destroyed hive. Godzilla and Rodan try to take it on, but it tanks their attack. I wonder if this is to indicate that Rodan's not that far off from Godzilla in terms of power, if he was the only other monster confident about rushing it head on. Regardless, all the monsters are easily outmatched and knocked out, save for Godzilla, who, again, in case you forgot, he is tired at this point. Somehow, all all the monsters subconsciously send their energy to Godzilla, and this gives him a new form which is referred to as Fusion Godzilla, giving him the power of all the other monsters. Well, I say all the other monsters, but I'm only going to count the monsters that are actually present after the battle. These would be King Caesar, Rodan, Zilla, I'm not sure how Jet Jaguar would work since he's a robot, but also it's Jet Jaguar, so who knows, Anguirus, Kumonga, Gorosaurus, Baragon, Canmobius, Titanosaurus, Varan, Gyra, Sandra, and that's pretty much it. Not really sure if Gigan would count. Like I said, Gigan's a bit of a wild card, so I'm not sure if he contributed energy, but Fusion Godzilla is able to lift the absurdly heavy Magita off of him, and basically two-shots it before passing out. It should be noted that the Mothra twin fairies stated that Godzilla might not survive this power-up, but of course he did because he's Godzilla. The remaining monsters following him out to sea as he lets out a final triumphant roar. We get a bit of a time skip to the future showing that Gigan did indeed survive the battle, along with apparently another Showa Mechagodzilla. Also, the human military's been busy building more of the classic Godzilla franchise weapons like the Maser tanks and the Super X. They really were leaving the door open for another story set in this timeline. Like I said before, Chad Ghidorah. So with all that finally taken care of, we have two things left to talk about. How strong is this particular Godzilla, and what is the ranking of all the monsters in Mecha from weakest to strongest? Before we cover the Feats section, there's one more story we need to talk about. That concerning Godzilla Rivals vs. Spacegodzilla from 2023. The story's basically about a bunch of aliens that find a sleeping Spacegodzilla, accidentally wake him up, and of course he causes havoc. One of his shoulder crystals get damaged before he ends up fighting a new original monster called Singura. The monster basically has the ability to create black holes, which Spacegodzilla himself is not able to overpower when he uses his Corona Beam. He uses his telekinesis to destroy the crystals, which helps Singura stabilize the black hole, basically causing the black hole to collapse on itself, sucking Singura up in it. He then proceeds to squish a crystallized baby monster, which may or may not be Chrysalac from the Godzilla Unleashed game, before thinking he has enough power to win a rematch against Godzilla. Why is this story so important? Well, it was written by Matt Frank, the same Matt Frank who pretty much co-produced the Rulers of Earth comic. As in, he pretty much did the artwork for like almost all the issues and co-wrote the story, along with co-creating the Trilopod monsters. At one point in the Spacegodzilla comic, there's a scene where he's having a flashback to a previous fight he had against Godzilla, and according to Matt Frank, this was apparently the same Godzilla from the Godzilla Ongoing / History's Greatest Monster comic, meaning that this Spacegodzilla is in fact the same one from the main IDW timeline. Supposedly, this would be Spacegodzilla prior to Rulers of Earth, and I guess would help explain how he got stronger in between the two series. However, I think the Versus Wiki fails to realize that Spacegodzilla himself didn't overcome the power of the black hole, rather he basically just turned the opposing monster's own power against him, which the Versus Wiki has measured to be large planetary in terms of destructive power. There's also a bit of confusion on when this story takes place, but I'm pretty sure the implication is that even though the story starts on August 30th, 2197, the rest of the story takes place in a flashback before that. And again, according to the writer himself, it likely takes place between Ongoing and Rulers of Earth. This is important because this one comic here basically makes the difference between whether this Godzilla is either small planetary based off the bare minimum power scaling of the black hole force field he destroyed back in Ongoing, to possibly large planetary based off Spacegodzilla beating a monster that generated a large planetary level black hole. Though to be fair, Spacegodzilla was weakened by the shoulder crystals he had being damaged. For all we know, that could have been the one reason why he couldn't overpower the black hole. And he did absorb more power from killing the baby crystal monster at the end of the story. And he's like, okay, now I can fight Godzilla. And again, if we talk about the theoretical strongest black holes, they would be multi-galaxy level. So that's kind of our highball estimate for how strong Godzilla can be. And obviously Godzilla himself got a lot stronger since Ongoing.
If we're going off of Dragon Ball logic, then the fact that his beam clash with Megaguirus at the end of Kingdom of Monsters was able to knock both of them out means that it must have been the total blast together a 7.5 multiplier, and Godzilla was contributing half of that energy. Not to mention the fact that his nuclear pulse is even stronger than that, since it was able to overcome the force field barrier of 4 Mechagodzillas that can tank his normal atomic breath. As for speed, he's able to react to both Spacegodzilla and Gigan. Gigan, of course, being able to fly fast enough in space to dodge lasers, as well as contend with Spacegodzilla. Though I do want to point out that obviously things moving in space are going to move a lot different in atmosphere because, you know, gravity, air resistance, friction. I mean, even official sources state that, like, the Showa Gigan and King Ghidorah move at, like, Mach 400 in space, even though they'd obviously have to be moving a lot faster than that in order to get from point A to point B in space anytime soon. So that's clearly bullcrap, and clearly whoever came up with that didn't do enough research into how space travel works. In any case, Godzilla was able to fire his atomic breath faster than the Trilopod Spacegodzilla clone could fire his crystals at Spacegodzilla. And again, Spacegodzilla is able to contend with Gigan, who can literally move faster than lasers, as well as shoot his own laser eye, which Spacegodzilla can dodge. So definitely faster than light reaction and combat speed. With this Godzilla monster rankings list, I am probably lowballing how strong the monsters get throughout each story, but I'd rather lowball than highball it. Obviously, Godzilla's atomic breath is going to be doing a lot more damage than his physical strikes, and the fact that Destroya can tank his atomic breath doesn't mean too much since Godzilla was in a weakened state at the time. And we don't know how strong Kiryu's Absolute Zero cannon is relative to Godzilla's atomic breath. And obviously Destroya has a temperature weakness against extreme temperatures, so obviously the Absolute Zero cannon was going to do extra damage to him. It is kind of crazy to think, however, that all the monsters by the end of the story are pretty much as strong as Orga and Destroya, which that brings me to another topic. According to Matt Frank, Spacegodzilla is apparently as strong as Destroya, and Spacegodzilla is also as strong as Gigan, who is also as strong as Mogira. And as you'll clearly see here, there are a lot of monsters that are all pretty much on like the same level of power. It's kind of ridiculous, but I think this current list ranking for Rulers of Earth is probably the safest way to go about it. Going off Dragon Ball power scaling, if you're at least 1/4 stronger than your opponent, you're going to dominate them, and then, you know, the bigger that gap gets, the less damage you'll take, and the more easily you'll take them out. And if you're at least twice as strong, you'll be able to tank their attacks pretty much with no damage. And I've kind of already gone over Godzilla's intelligence. The fact that he's able to plan ahead when he lost the first time against Destroya, not only does he get a nuclear reactor to power himself up further, but he waits specifically to use it until Mothra shows up, just to further increase his chances of winning. Not to mention, yeah, he can coordinate and attack with other monsters, the most notable being when he's fighting side by side with Kiryu and Mogira and Spacegodzilla and all the other monsters that show up. One moment in the comics even has one of the human characters praising Godzilla's battle tactics. So I'd say at least human average, since he's able to coordinate and communicate with other different species of monsters. It's hard to say how strong he was prior to his first power-up at the end of issue 1 of Kingdom of Monsters. How far would Godzilla get in the story without his atomic breath, I wonder? I'd say the bare minimum, Godzilla got at least 40 times stronger over the course of all 3 comic stories, and this is prior to his fusion form, which is a further 7.75 multiplier at the bare minimum. I'd say this is enough to likely push Godzilla into either the planetary level range, or even the brown dwarf level range if we're using the black hole feat from the Spacegodzilla comic. One panel in the climax issue of Rulers of Earth, Godzilla actually deflects an energy attack with his tail, something which I don't think we've ever seen any other Godzilla do, so for all we know, he could potentially deflect another Godzilla's atomic breath. I'd say probably the most dangerous thing about this Godzilla is the fact that he just rapidly grows stronger and stronger the more he fights, even when he's getting tired. So his stamina is legendary in the fact that it almost seems to not even really affect his ability to fight, as he can keep growing stronger even as he's getting tired. But whether he's high, small planetary, just barely making it to planetary, large planetary, or just barely making it into the brown dwarf level, this Godzilla is definitely respectable in power compared to the ones we've covered so far. Definitely top 10 with what we've looked at so far in this series. Join me next time as we finally return and cover the rest of the Pipeworks Godzilla with Godzilla Unleashed. Hope you join me then, folks. Take care.